This is my 1,000-gallon cloud rainforest vivarium I call Pantdora, a tropical rainforest ecosystem of exotic creatures, great and small, all living within glass. But a new age in our rainforest has come. For up on the floor above is a new world that will attach to our current rainforest via a glass bridge through the floor that will literally take our rainforest to new heights. Behold, my newly constructed giant Canopy Vivarium, the official upper tree layer of our rainforest. And this is the insane story of how I created it and what new creatures happen to already be living inside. Welcome to the AntsCanada Ant Channel. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC fam. Enjoy. It was nighttime in Pantdora, and the inhabitants of our rainforest had no idea a major change was about to take place in their world. The carpenter ants were out foraging, isopods were busy feeding, geckos and tree frogs had emerged for the hunt. And in the pond, so did a particular beast. It was Godzilla, our resident caiman. He was hungry and was staring at the tiny baby crickets and other such diminutive creatures on a branch. They were much too small for him though, but he knew he'd be eating these babies when they were older. And indeed, the prey insects of our rainforest were about to receive the craziest paradise any insect could wish for, in which to grow and thrive. As I looked into the empty tank of our Canopy Vivarium to be, I imagined the finished vivarium as I saw it in my mind. I began to trace the general shape and form of the vivarium as I envisioned it once done. It looks a bit silly, I know, but oddly enough, after decades of terrarium landscaping these naturalistic spaces for my animals, this visualization phase has become a big part of my process, especially for the hardest of terrariumscapes, like this one I was about to attempt. This was the first time I ever tried building an arboreal world of trees, and to be honest, I wasn't even sure if it would be possible. But I knew that if I could somehow pull it off, a Canopy Vivarium would be one of the greatest and coolest biological worlds I'd ever constructed in my life. And so, 2 weeks ago, before attempting to start building our canopy, I hopped on a plane and flew somewhere super cool first, for some well-needed inspo. A cable car took me through the most stunning bird's-eye view, nearly 5,000 feet above the cloud rainforest, covering the Bana Hills in Da Nang, Vietnam. I flew here to this mountain location in Vietnam specifically for this perspective of what a true cloud rainforest is like, for I knew our Canopy Vivarium tank would stretch my vivarium building skills to the limit, and so I needed to take notes from the OG creator of worlds herself, Mother Nature. Check out the view. The trees looked stunning from above, like a dense carpet of green, blanketing the mountain, a living roof over networks of rivers and waterfalls, cool rock formations, and plenty of vegetative growth. Among the endless communities of ferns, branches, and foliage, I could only imagine what sorts of cool life existed inside this giant cloud rainforest. Now you guys will be amazed at what this cloud rainforest looks like when it completely transforms during an amazing event that happens every afternoon in this forest. But meanwhile, some of you might be asking yourself, What exactly is a canopy? Is it just trees? Surely a tree vivarium would be a bit boring, and certainly not as interesting as what goes on in Pantdora at ground level, right? Well, not so fast. I actually used to think so too, until I began researching about the biological haven that is the forest canopy. So listen to this. All rainforests are composed of 4 main layers: the emergent layer, or overstory, which is basically the uppermost area of the tops of trees, where it's windy, hot, and exposed to the most sun. The canopy, which is more leaf-dense, humid, and warm. The understory, which is much cooler and darker. And the forest floor, covered in leaf litter and ground plants, and where the soil begins. Our vivarium Pantdora is basically a rainforest floor and a bit of the understory layer of the rainforest. Now, one would think that the majority of life in a rainforest is found on the forest floor and understory, right? But it turns out the greatest concentration and biodiversity of rainforest life isn't on the rainforest floor, nor the understory. It is actually up high in the canopy. Scientists estimate that 60 to 90% of all life in a rainforest can be found in the canopy layer, making it the richest habitat for plant and animal life compared to any place else in the rainforest. Many animals that are largely thought of as ground-dwelling creatures, like poison dart frogs, land crabs, and worms, actually spend a great deal of time in the canopy. Surprising, right? Thinking back to Pantdora, so many of our Pandoran creatures have a natural liking for the upper regions of the vivarium, choosing to hang out on our vines, rock wall, moss wall, the highest asparagus ferns, driftwood summit, or mesh screen. This is exactly why I was thrilled when you guys helped me through a series of votes and polls on my community tab to decide on canopy as the biome type for our next giant ecosystem vivarium. I knew the grand moment Pantdora was connected to its new treetop bank of biodiversity that was to be the new canopy. A whole new chapter in the story of our rainforest would begin. But when the time came to begin the build, I had no idea just how crazy reconstructing such a complex layer of life in the rainforest would be. So many obstacles needed to be overcome first.
Creator of worlds is gonna rock your world.
I had my full arsenal of plants ready for me to select and choose from while constructing. Each of these plant species were selected specifically for this Canopy Vivarium build as the best candidates for plants that would thrive in the environment I was hoping to build. I wouldn't be using all of them, but when I build terrariums, I usually get a good variety of plant life and spread them all out nicely so I can choose as needed, like an artist's various paints on a palette. I already had a rough idea of what the vivarium might look like in my head, but there was no telling whether or not the final outcome would turn out as expected. The first step was to create the main and largest component of the canopy, the trees. When building terrariums, I would usually start with the soil layer first, like I did with Pantdora. But in this case, there would be no such soil layer, since this world was up in the trees. But there was just one problem, and it was a big one. How to grow trees in a vivarium? Short answer is, you can't really. Well, you can, but it would require a ton of space, a ton of soil, a ton of water, and a ton of light. A failure to provide an insufficient amount of any of these things would kill the tree. So my idea was to improvise our trees by fixing dead tree trunks into the vivarium. And for that, I chose dead coffee tree wood, native to the tropics, and the plan was to add a plethora of rich foliage to them later. Now, as some of you may recall with the construction of Pantdora, when I landscape tanks, one of my styling secrets is to choose one feature item to be the star of the tank, so to speak, around which all decor would revolve and tie the entire landscape together. It could be a special plant, a cool-looking rock, or a piece of driftwood, like in Pantdora, where the feature piece was the Hallelujah tree stump. It's the first thing most people see, and makes the tank pop. But for this Canopy Vivarium, the main star would be this huge branch here, which would form the main arching skeleton of our Canopy Vivarium. I loved its shape, but I needed to get the arrangement and position of the wood in the tank perfect. It would determine the overall shape of our canopy when everything was done. I tried so many positions, and I had to saw some branches down to size, prop the branch up using other driftwood, and pressure lock the branch ends together and trunk bases into the corners to form a stable structure. After a couple days of trying out various configurations, I was happy with the arrangement of the branches, and it was time for the next step. Now, although I couldn't grow legit trees inside the vivarium, there was an exception that I could possibly try out. Meet the strangler fig, also known as a banyan tree. It's not quite a true tree in its early stages of life, but it has a very interesting life cycle. So get this, it's known as a hemiepiphyte. The reason they're called strangler figs is because they use trees around them as a host, which provide a structure for them to climb and grow upward. The strangler fig eventually gets so big as it matures into a tree that it eventually strangles the tree to death. So this bonsai strangler fig, which I'd been keeping temporarily in my aviary, was the perfect addition to our canopy. It was heavy and already looked like a giant tree, shrunken down, with plenty of air roots. I had another species of strangler fig to keep it company. I've never tried growing strangler figs indoors, but I really hoped it would survive, because imagine a full-blown strangler fig climbing our branches and busting out of our tank. Okay, maybe that wouldn't be so good. But I had time to think about a plan for if these trees ever did outgrow our canopy space. Once that was in, it was time for the hardest part of all. And man, this was where things got extremely difficult. I added a layer of black lava rocks. This was simply a filler to cover the bottom of the tank. The lava rocks would be great at hosting beneficial bacteria. Then I added a layer of charcoal for absorbing impurities and to keep the vivarium odor-free. I specifically chose black-colored media because this bottom space was supposed to look like a void, not like a soil surface, so to give the illusion of a space high up in the trees. Now, adding plants was much more complex than the ordinary rainforest construction build I was used to, due to the lack of a legit soil layer. The plants I chose for this Canopy Vivarium were species specifically adapted for life up high in the canopy. The majority of the plants were epiphytes, which are plants that grow on other plants and trees. I chose to start with plants that would resemble the leaves of our trees, trying out different options of both epiphytes and bushy vining plants in hanging pots of soil to see what worked best. Now you may be thinking, hey, soil? I thought there wouldn't be a soil layer. Yes, true, no soil layer. But up in the canopy, there are spots where organic clumps of nutrient-rich compost created from decaying leaf litter, animal waste, and wood actually do collect. Like in the fork of trees, tree hollows, the surfaces of horizontal branches, or the natural pits in tree bark. And it's within these organic traps of compost that plants in the canopy thrive. These soil pots, from which most of our epiphytes and vining plants grow, represent these special nutrient-rich spots of growing media. Over time, more of such composty areas will naturally form as our canopy matures. But initially, these soil pots are essential growing spots for our plants. This process took such a long time. As I landscaped, it was fun to imagine what creatures in Pantdora would wander up here. I'm sure the acrobat ants, dwarf ants, and carpenter ants would love this world. I also had a multi-queen weaver ant colony in the making, ready to move in. For sure the tree frogs would love it up here, Perhaps we might even see Drake, our male sunskink, who is pretty good on the vines, wandering up here. But my greatest bet were the crickets and roaches, whom I knew would love this canopy, which would actually act as a refugium for them, offering a place in which they could hide and further procreate, away from the pressures of ground-dwelling predators. In terms of predators, for sure huntsmen would make their way up here. I couldn't wait for the day I spotted Lady Deathstrike up in these trees. Finally, I had a mantis egg sac just waiting to be added. I also had some other new creatures in mind to place in here, but you guys will just have to see what they are once I add them in. I also was quite aware that there would be life unintentionally introduced into here, seeing as the plants all came from outdoor nurseries. Pantdora was completely seeded with life from the plants and decor, which was amazing. For the most part, I just had to do my best to make sure invasive ants weren't added, like fire ants or black crazy ants like last time, which can devastate an ecosystem. Little did I know, there already were introduced creatures secretly hiding in the plants, and I was about to discover them soon. The next day, I added the vines. Also known as lianas, vines are rooted into soils of the rainforest floor throughout their lives, so they take nothing from the trees they live on, except support. I collected a series of vines from the tropical forest in my yard and strung them along the top of the tank, through the branches, and even strung them down the glass bridge. This would offer some great climbing opportunities for creatures that couldn't climb glass, so they too could reach the canopy. Over the next several days, I continued to add more and more details to the scape, rearranging foliage and decor over and over again. This landscaping process was tough, and just when I thought I had worked out a landscaping configuration I was happy with, I ended up changing my mind, completely redoing a whole day's work. You see, the issue here was, this vivarium wasn't the ordinary terrarium build that I was used to. It needed to represent and look like a canopy. So, if there were too many ground plants, for instance, it would simply look like a rainforest floor habitat. Even the choice of plant species affected the overall look. Again, the entire build was largely experimental, and I still had my doubts it could actually be done. I spent every single waking day and night in the ant room. The mornings became evenings in a flash, as I dedicated full brain bandwidth to the build. Suffered a few scrapes and injuries, but it was nothing your creator of worlds couldn't handle. What was stumping me, however, was getting the look of the canopy right, which I very quickly realized was going to take a whole lot longer than expected. By day 6, I grew quite frustrated due to being unable to get the look I wanted right, and I ended up missing an upload last week. The glaring problem was that there was just something missing from the design of the tank that kept it from looking like a canopy, but I couldn't quite put a finger on what it was. To me, it still looked like a rainforest floor, no matter what I did. By day 11, I was quite close to just throwing up my hands and giving up. The idea that this Canopy Vivarium was too ambitious was really sinking in, and I was already thinking of a whole apology post on my community tab about how I would need to change the concept of the vivarium. But suddenly, a movement at the center of the vivarium caught my eye. Hey, it's a baby spider. It must have unintentionally been introduced through one of the plants or decor. It was an orb weaver spider and was busy spinning its famous wheel-shaped orb web. I watched as it weaved its nearly invisible line of silk, attaching it so precisely and tirelessly to all the right points of the web. It was amazing to me that despite not having an instructions manual, this tiny creature already knew how to build its complex, magnificent silk structure. Mesmerized, I watched it spiral around and around, completing the web ever so delicately and gradually as it drew closer and closer towards the center of its web. finally completed the construction, it rested at the center. How neat! It was quite hard to see exactly where it had attached the primary lines of silk from which the entire web branched out of. Wait a minute. Hard to see where it had attached. Branched out. That's it. As if the spider carried a message, like the whispering voice of our canopy to be suddenly speaking to me. I finally understood what the missing piece of our canopy puzzle was, and knew what I had to do to complete our giant canopy vivarium. Behold, our new canopy vivarium, I call Orchadia. So, what do you think? Let's have a full tour around these treetops, shall we? I named this new arboreal world, with your help, for those of you who voted in my community tab for the name Orchadia, which means a quiet and peaceful place, joined with the gorgeous flowers of these treetops, the orchids, which I'll get more into later. I created the canopy to represent a tree that supports a vast array of other plant life, from epiphytes to lianas to hemiepiphytes, with a species saturation that stays true to the biodiversity that exists in wild canopies. Let's start with the epiphytes. This here is bird's nest fern, one of my favorite epiphytes. They're shaped like baskets, so they can catch pieces of organic matter and animal droppings falling in the canopy for nourishment. Similarly, these are bromeliads, which are growing attached to wood and capture water and nutrients in their pits. Perfect for soilless life in the canopy. Curtains of Spanish moss, a type of air plant, gets its nutrients from moisture in the air and nutrients falling on it, carried by raindrops trickling down the canopy off other plants and trees. Various ferns, calycia, and philodendrons adorn the branches. Living mosses and climbing plants that were already living on the branches when the tree was still alive came back to life with the new humidity and lights, adding such a cool forest feel to the environment. I really loved this lemon-lime philodendron, matching the one in Pantdora, a cool climbing plant that is also epiphytic, attaching its roots to the trunks of trees, climbing upward into the canopy, collecting nutrients trapped in the bark, and accessing better quality light. And some of my ultimate favorite epiphytes of all. Orchids. I've never really had the chance to incorporate orchids into a terrarium simply because they weren't suitable for my terrariums in the past, and can be notoriously picky with where they're placed and grown. But if there was an ultimate haven for orchids to thrive in an indoor setting, our Canopy Vivarium would be the best there was. It's literally their natural habitat. Orchids are the most diverse group of flowering plants, with over 18,000 species, representing about 8% of all flowering plants found worldwide, and are very well adapted to life in the canopy. Their roots, which cling onto the surfaces of trees, wood, or rocks, have a large surface area for rapid absorption of nutrients and water. Orchids like to grow together in communities, so I made sure to get 2. I may get more in the future. If the orchids approve of where they're growing and have sufficient nutrients, they will continue to bloom multiple times a year. They offered some gorgeous pops of color in our canopy. Of course, our strangler figs looked great in their spots. I built the entire canopy around them, so they acted like anchors of the canopy. I expect them to drop some leaves over the next few weeks as they adapt to the new space. But let's hope they grow into banyan trees here and start stringing their iconic vining roots and branches all around. Speaking of vines, I found ivy to be beautiful vining plants for our canopy, particularly for the area around the glass bridge. The large vines, strung all around, were still alive but it would take some time before they start sending out leaves, like Pandora's vines. But they're wasting no time, as I see the humidity of the canopy has stimulated the vines to grow air roots, which will reach for pots of soil. Together, the blended plant life formed a beautiful botanical community, with the lines between individual plants somewhat blurred, forming a single superorganism, like collective organs, to one massive living canopic beast. But there was one ultimate piece of decor that tied the whole look of the canopy together and saved the day for me. The final piece of the puzzle that made this entire tank finally look like a canopy that was inspired by the orb weaver spider I watched building its web. It was this massive tree trunk. For the longest time, the feature branch I added to me just looked like a fallen limb on the rainforest floor with plants growing on it. But looking at the spider's orb web, I realized from being unable to see where the main silk lines were attached that our main feature branch also needed to attach to something, and that something was currently unseen. And so, I made it seen by adding in this tree trunk. The moment I did, suddenly the branch no longer looked like it was a dead limb on the floor of the rainforest. Our branch now had life as an extension of a great tree. What's even cooler was that I noticed right away that the branch was no longer the star branch, but now the entire tree had become the star piece of this vivarium. It completely transformed this lush world into a true canopy. I added another branch at the top to tell the story that the tree continued up into more canopy space above, and also fixated a smaller neighboring tree to show that other trees were within close proximity, competing for space and resources. Our rainforest canopy was complete now, and I was so grateful. But want to see something else cool? As above, so below, for the great tree trunk continued down into Pantdora, which made for a beautiful continuity of the two biological worlds. I never addressed what the moss wall in Pantdora actually was, and I simply kept calling it a moss wall. But now we know, all along, it was a massive tree trunk on which grew carpets of moss, epiphytes, and vines. It was so cool to look up into the canopy from below, into the tree world, connected and continuing above. I made sure to take some of the blooming vines growing in Pantdora and guide them along one of the hanging vines that would take them through the glass bridge and up into the canopy. An asparagus fern stalk had already found the bridge and began to grow upward. I can't wait to watch how our two biological worlds would merge to form one ecosystem the moment I unblock the glass bridge in a few more moments. I programmed the rains to blow through Orchadia and Pantdora simultaneously. Watching it rain in both worlds was just a magical sight to behold. You know, it's just amazing. This all started out as a crazy idea and concept on paper, and we finally made it a reality. Thank you all for helping me create Orchadia. This is our canopy, and I was determined to do all I could to help it thrive. Marveling at it made me realize how valuable and important it was to preserve such natural spaces in forests of our fantastic world. As I descended back to the foot of the mountain in the cable car that afternoon, a huge cloudy fog arrived to blanket the forest. It was the craziest fog of fogs, completely impenetrable visually. It brought with it a cool, life-bringing humidity to all the plants and animals living within it. It was then that I realized how alive the cloud rainforest was, but specifically how the entire forest was like one massive superorganism, much like our Canopy Vivarium was. Living, breathing, made up of endless living and non-living components. I suddenly felt in my little cable car that I was like a little tiny shrunken ant-man venturing deep into some crazy giant living animal or life form. Forest canopies are arguably considered some of the most species-rich environments on the planet. It is believed that the complex communities found within the canopy layer play an important role in the functioning of the forest, as well as maintaining ecological resilience. Sadly, rainforests of the world are decreasing at an alarming rate of 80,000 acres every single day, and with it, the trillions of living things that make up these dynamic biomes. Losing such natural spaces is unfortunate. Trees are also essential for our well-being. Aside from the fact that trees take in the greenhouse gas of carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, which we need, I don't think people talk enough about the fact that trees impact our immune system and ability to fight cancer. Did you guys know this? So check this out. Scientists have discovered that trees produce natural oils called phytoncides, which initially are designed to ward off pest insects, bacteria, and fungi. But when we humans breathe in these phytoncides from the air, it causes our bodies to produce more of what are called natural killer cells, which are immune cells that destroy cells in our body damaged by viruses or cancer. Simply being in and around forests or a lot of trees helps our bodies overcome illness. Plus, not to mention all the natural medicines waiting to be discovered in the world's forests that could be cures to some of the world's thought to be incurable diseases. It's undeniable that we humans are still in a lot of ways creatures of the forest. And my hope is that this whole biological project, observing and caring for Orchadia and Pantdora, might help us understand a little bit more about our place in the bigger picture within the largest vivarium of all, planet Earth. In the night, the canopy was absolutely breathtaking, like staring into a divine portal at God's nocturnal garden. And I was quite shocked to discover yet another unintentionally imported creature. A tree frog. Hey there. At first I thought maybe one of our tree frogs had somehow snuck up here, but the glass bridge was blocked with sponge, so this tree frog had definitely snuck in by way of the plants. Welcome to our canopy, tree frog. I can't wait for you to finally meet your Pandoran tree frog friends once we unblock the glass bridge. Which brings me now to the moment we've all been waiting for. The next day was the big day. Now that the canopy was completed and had a few days to settle with its new plant life and introduced creatures, it was time to populate it with its first round of animals. And the first step was to unplug the glass bridge and officially open up the gates of Orchadia to the residents of Pantdora. Beloved Pandorans, it's time to enjoy your new world of trees. Vote in my community tab to affect this story